Well, so I think the moon landing was this absolutely crazy project. If you look at the level of technology that they had in the 1960s, it was just insane to try and go land on the moon. They were maybe 20 years ahead of where they should have been, and they just started out to do this crazy project. And I'm not sure how many of the technical details are still relevant. Maybe we can learn engineering things. But what is relevant is every now and then people involved in programming or other technologies, every now and then you think about starting some crazy project that everyone thinks is doomed to failure. Well, if you're going to do that, if you're a person who's thinking about trying to do something a little crazy, maybe you should look at other crazy projects that actually succeeded. And one of the points that I make in the talk is that one of the key reasons they succeeded was they decided to do it in the first place. Because, crazy projects, right? The definition of crazy project is this is something someone will never even try. And there is a certain element of truth in the idea that you don't know that you can't do it until you try it. So I think that's kind of a general lesson in life as well as technology. Well, so I think, in one sense, I think it's sort of an impossible question because I think people are born generalists or born specialists, and that's fine. The world needs, I think, this is just my opinion, that it's something that's wired into all of us. Do I want to dive deeply into this one thing and learn everything in the world about it? Or do I want to sort of, in my case, am I easily bored, right? Which is how I think I ended up a generalist, is that I can learn something for a little while and then I'm a little bored with it and I want to go on to the next thing. And that sounds like a disadvantage. It's really not, because if you keep going on to the next thing, then you have this kind of horizontal view of how things work, as opposed to a vertical, a very narrow way it works. So what are the advantages of being a generalist? Well, there's all these cliches about, you can see the big picture and the whole thing. And really, the advantage of having a generalist on your team, say, is that there will be all of these people who have these specialties and essentially are working in silos, right? And that's fine. You need people who are good at whatever they're doing. But you also need people, big picture, not so much. You just need someone who can see the next silo over, or maybe two silos over, because that's where the big mistakes happen, is you have maybe two people or two groups working side by side, but they don't really understand what the other one is doing. And so the advantage of a generalist is not some magical, I see the big picture. It's, I see what the people down the hall are doing and how that's not working, together with what we're doing. Well, there's the obvious ones. People skills, I think, are probably the most critical one. But people skills in terms of, you need to train yourself to see the world from the other person's point of view. And that's a useful skill. Again, in software development, I don't know, maybe in music composition and running a radio station. I think it's a generally useful skill. I think another skill that's really important is being able to write and communicate clearly, write and speak clearly. And again, I think one of the problems is that if your main interest is technology, you will maybe go through the university or just go through life and people will tell you, you people are not good at communicating, or you're not a people person. And it's a little bit of a stereotype, and some people are clearly born with a talent for communication or can see the world from other, it's just something you can be born with, but they are also learned skills. And so if you have trouble writing or communicating or maybe just kind of coping with people, don't imagine that is just something you're stuck with. You learned the program, you learned HTML and SQL, you can learn to write English or Italian or German or whatever. You can learn to communicate effectively with people. The really good communicators maybe started with an advantage, but then they spent years learning how to do it. So there's all of that, and let me put in a kind of strange plug for something I do, which is that I build musical instruments from things that you would not think musical instruments will come from. Junk is, and that is a hobby that has a long tradition in the United States, and it's wonderful for honing your skills in software development, because you look at a box maybe that cigars came in, and maybe you see a box that cigars came in, but maybe you see the body of a guitar. So you see things for what you can use them for, and not just for what they were meant for. And if that's not a skill that you need in software, I don't know what is. That is the essence of software, is looking at something and saying, maybe I can do something different with that. Oh, absolutely. So at Cognitect, we have a product called Datomic, which is a very, it sounds silly, but it's a very data-driven database, which just sounds ridiculous. But what that means is things like the schema of the database is actually data that you can manipulate in the database. And I think that, the world is now awash in data. We are collecting data at rates that, could not have imagined even just a few years ago. And the question really is, can you do anything with, here's the cliche, right? Can I extract some wisdom from that data is, I guess, the cliche. And yeah, I think that it's not like, I think the question is not, is interest growing? The question really is there anything else that's really interesting? Maybe AI and machine learning and things like that, but I think data is one of the things that's just going to dominate our world for the next however long time. I'm sure my colleagues would say Clojure and Datomic. And I say that jokingly, but I think that is true. I think you need a general purpose programming language and a general purpose kind of data store. So those tend to be my choices. I think obviously Python is kind of the overwhelming favorite in the data world. But again, I would go back to some of my answer about being a generalist, which is if you are a data person and you think of yourself as a data person, then you should go learn some software engineering, because in my sort of experiences with data people, the data side of what they do is like magic, and I can't believe it, and it just seems like I'm living in the future. And the software engineering side of what they do frequently strikes me as I'm living in the 1990s. Because most data people, they're not software engineers, and they haven't grown up with these practices, and in particular, maybe they haven't been at it long enough to really get bitten by some of the software engineering sorts of things. So that's the one side of it. I think if you're a software engineer, well, you need to go learn the underpinnings, the real sort of theoretical underpinnings of how people deal with data. Software engineers are great at being fakes. Right? We go to an accounting firm and we are fake accountants, right? We learn just enough accounting to build that system because, or we go to maybe an engineering company and we learn just enough mechanical engineering to build the thing. I don't think data is like that. I think you really have to understand what you're doing to be able to do an effective job of it.